Why are the EU and NATO aware of being engaged in an information war with Russia, while the US seems less conscious of it? The European Union, EU and NATO have been more conscious of the ongoing information war with Russia compared to the United States for several reasons, rooted in historical experience, geographical proximity, and differing political priorities. Here's an analysis of why this disparity exists. 1. Historical and geopolitical context. Proximity to Russia. EU and NATO member states are geographically closer to Russia, making them more vulnerable to Russian influence operations, disinformation campaigns, and hybrid warfare tactics. Countries like the Baltic states, Poland, and Ukraine have experienced direct Russian attempts to destabilize their democracies and national security. Historical legacy. Many EU and NATO countries, especially in Eastern Europe, have a living memory of Soviet influence or occupation. These nations are acutely aware of Russia's use of propaganda and disinformation as tools of geopolitical strategy. This legacy has shaped their policies and heightened their sensitivity to modern information warfare. 2. Direct experiences with Russian aggression cyber attacks. European countries have faced numerous Russian cyber attacks, including the 2007 attacks on Estonia and the 2015 to 2016 attacks on Ukraine's power grid. These attacks were coupled with disinformation efforts to sow discord and confusion. Election meddling. Russian interference in European elections, such as the French presidential election, 2017, and Brexit referendum, 2016, has been extensively documented, raising alarm about the Kremlin's broader strategy. Hybrid warfare in Ukraine, Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, and its ongoing war in eastern Ukraine have demonstrated its use of hybrid warfare, which blends military action, cyber attacks, and disinformation to achieve its objectives. These events served as a wake-up call for Europe. 3. Institutional responses in Europe, EU Stratcom. Task Force. The EU established the East Stratcom Task Force in 2015 to counter Russian disinformation. It monitors Russian media, debunks fake news, and educates the public on disinformation tactics. NATO's strategic communication initiatives. NATO has actively prioritized countering hybrid threats and disinformation. The establishment of the NATO Strategic Communication Center of Excellence in Riga, Latvia, reflects a commitment to tackling these issues through research, policy, and training, legislation, and regulation. The EU has adopted stricter measures against online disinformation, such as the EU Code of Practice on Disinformation, which compels tech companies to be more transparent and accountable. 4. Different political climate in the United States. Polarization and partisan divides. In the US, the recognition of Russian disinformation has been heavily politicized. Efforts to counter Russian interference have often been undermined by partisan narratives, especially during and after the 2016 election. Some political leaders have downplayed the threat to avoid scrutiny of their ties to Russia or for fear of appearing weak. Focus on domestic issues. US political attention has been dominated by domestic concerns, such as economic inequality, racial justice, and healthcare. These priorities can overshadow the urgency of addressing foreign disinformation campaigns. Leadership under Trump administration. Former President Donald Trump's reluctance to criticize Russia or acknowledge its interference in US politics led to inconsistent efforts to counter Russian disinformation. For example, agencies like the Department of State's Global Engagement Center, GEC, struggled to receive adequate funding and support to counter disinformation during his tenure. Weaker media literacy initiatives. Compared to Europe, the US has been slower to implement education and public awareness campaigns aimed at increasing resilience against disinformation. 5. Cultural and institutional differences. Stronger transatlantic unity in Europe. European nations and NATO member states are more accustomed to multilateral cooperation on security issues. In contrast, the US often emphasizes unilateral approaches, which may slow coordinated responses to information warfare. Media environment. The fragmented and highly polarized media environment in the US makes it easier for disinformation to take root. European countries, by contrast, often have stronger public broadcasting systems and less fragmented media landscapes, which can serve as a counterbalance to disinformation. 6. Evolving US awareness. While the US has lagged behind Europe and NATO in recognizing and addressing the information war, there have been signs of progress. FBI and DHS warnings. U.S. agencies have issued warnings about Russian cyber and disinformation campaigns targeting elections. Bipartisan congressional efforts. Some bipartisan initiatives in Congress have aimed to counter foreign interference, including the establishment of election security measures and calls for increased regulation of social media platforms. Tech industry accountability. U.S. tech companies like Facebook, Twitter, and Google have come under increasing scrutiny for their role in amplifying disinformation, prompting them to adopt some self-regulation measures. Conclusion: the EU and NATO's heightened awareness stems from their historical experiences, direct exposure to Russian aggression, and institutional prioritization of countering hybrid threats. The US, while increasingly acknowledging the threat, has been hindered by internal political divisions, a slower institutional response, and less public awareness. Moving forward, greater transatlantic cooperation, robust public education on disinformation, and depoliticized approaches to election security and media regulation will be essential to countering the information war effectively.